Hi everyone, and welcome to this video in the Engaging with Art series. For today's video, I wanted to talk about a tool for viewing art and trying to understand it as viewers. Obviously, this whole entire series is about trying to help viewers have a richer experience when viewing artwork. But today specifically, I wanted to try to outline a tangible, real-life tool that you can actually apply when viewing art that I think will be really helpful. Just to preface, this is not something that I necessarily think is totally original or that I'm thinking is novel, but it's also something that I haven't necessarily taken from somebody directly. So it's a matter of happenstance if this topic has been covered or outlined by somebody else previously. This is just something that came to me in dialogue with a couple of other people. And it gave me the idea that this might be something that's useful that I could actually talk about and develop further. In broad strokes, what do I mean by note taking when it comes to visual art or when it comes to any form of art at all? And basically, I look at it as a tool for experiencing artwork as viewers. Now, it's going to look a little bit different for whatever medium of artwork you're trying to experience. For example, when it comes to visual art, there's the visual aspect. When it comes to music, there's the audible aspect. Sometimes with literature, you're looking at internal imagery, that there's not a visual on the page. Instead, we have the words, we're reading them, and in our minds, we're conjuring the images and the story itself. And so all of these are going to look a little bit different. It's always important, as I've spoken in the past, to keep in mind what is the medium I'm engaging with, what type of art is this, again, whether it's music or film or literature or visual art, and how that's going to impact the methodology we're going to use when approaching it and how we're going to experience it. It's going to vary in terms of atmosphere as well. If you consider the difference between, say, a live performance or a stage play versus reading a book, those are very vastly different experiences. And so the way that you're going to be engaging with, say, a stage play versus a novel, both of which are art forms, is going to be very different, and so you want to take note into that as well. Likewise, for interactive media such as a video game, you're going to be engaging with it in a different way. There's going to be an input and like an output immediacy to the actual engagement, since you're going to be using your hands to input things on a device that's going to then affect the world that you're seeing. And so these are all things that need to be kept in mind. For this conversation, however, because I'm a visual artist and because, visual art's my wheelhouse more than the others, I want to make the focus here on visual art. So the reason I'm saying all of this when it comes to the presentation and the atmosphere is because it's going to be very diverse across different media. And for this conversation, I want to specifically look at visual art specifically, whether it be a sculpture or a 2D piece of art that's hanging on a wall. This sort of overall method is something that I want to apply largely to visual art in that form. Now, for some preparatory work, you need to do something on your part as viewers. Quite literally, when you're wanting to take notes, I want you to have like lined paper or even like a pad of paper. I was thinking that a journal might be helpful because something that's bound that you can go back to is probably good. Loose leaf obviously gets lost easily, and so it's probably more wise to just have something that's consistent, like art viewing journal or something like that. I would include a pencil or a pen, although probably a pencil if you wanted to make little edits, but everybody has their own preference when it comes to a writing utensil. So I always say, like, whatever your favorite preferred writing utensil is. And then also a highlighter or some kind of secondary tool for emphasis. If you're using pencil, maybe pen can be that secondary tool. But I think a highlighter, something that you can just outline or circle with that's going to make certain things stand out, is also important. For the next part of the discussion, we're going to break it down into 3 elements. Basically, what you see, what you emotionally experience, and then what you conceptually sort of conceive at the idea front. The first is what we see. Again, focusing here on visual artwork. I want you to first start taking notes on a few things that are recognizable. For example, take notes on the subject matter. Take notes on any recognizable forms you may see, and especially on anything that is recurring or repeated visually. I want you to take note of the color palette, of any shapes that you recognize. Again, repetition and patterns, especially with those shapes and with that color palette. I now want you to take note of any words you see, especially what they say explicitly or what they appear to say. They are stylized. You can take note of the font, especially. Do they appear in typeface? Do they appear handwritten? If it is an interactive media, for example, sculpture, or do we have any moving elements? Even two-dimensional things can have moving elements. You can imagine if somebody is incorporating fabric onto a canvas, they may actually have some pieces that are deliberately meant to wave when air is blown by them. Take note of all these things you're seeing. As I was kind of outlining that too, what I think the best tool to do is note these things in little chunks, right? So again, the subject matter and recognizable forms, things that you recognize in the artwork, and then color palette, shapes, that sort of thing, and then words repeated, and then you can take that a step further. There might be other elements that I'm not thinking of, but what I want you to do is notate all of these, and then finally, I want you to summarize or highlight what stands out the most or seems most significant. For example, if a piece is predominantly a circle on a canvas, you can highlight the fact that it's a circle. I'm sure like in the other sections, you probably have like what colors it is, what type of, is it, on a canvas? Is it on paper? These are other things you can also notate as well. But that circle is what's probably want to highlight that, right? Because it's the thing that is most emphasized, that is most standing out for you on that like visual, what do I immediately see? The next section of this is the emotions. So now you can either turn the page or just maybe make a demarcation line. And next, I want you to start noting your initial response and reaction. How does the artwork that you're viewing immediately make you feel at an emotional level and the reactions you're having towards it? Then I want you to sit with the artwork. I want you to continue viewing it. And then as a little bit of time passes, as you're still just contemplating it, still trying to be present with it, the next notes I want you to take have to do with the internal growth. So after you're sitting with the work, after your attention continues to linger there, what are the emotions that are coming up with you in the longer term? Are you still having some of those initial ones, or have new ones arisen? I think the biggest thing to focus on are new ones that have arisen. If something is kind of still ringing for you, if we are 20 minutes in with a piece of art, and you still are feeling the same thing, then jot that down in this longer term section. But the idea is now to really, what am I feeling in a longer term? You could take this a step further as well. You could maybe, with this experiment, with this method, you could possibly look at a piece of artwork one day and then come back to it the next day or the next week, and you could use that for the internal growth section. I would also argue you could do this in 30 years. You could look at different points in your life. It's going to affect you differently. That's just how all art does. All art operates like that. For this final notation section, once you've got initial and then a little bit farther on, I want you just lastly to any additional feelings or things that you feel more subtly. I think as we contemplate anything in this life, there's the immediacy, there's a longer term, and then if we're really sort of looking between the lines as we read back over things, we'll notice the subtle ones more rise. It's the silent things. So make that just a section at the bottom that's more, just smaller probably, but still something worthwhile. So those subtle ones, just the lingering in between ones. And finally, again, I want you to summarize your emotional responses. Pay attention to that which bears most prominence for you specifically. Maybe just jot down like overall, what is it after looking at these things that I've just written down, what is it that I can say about the emotional response as a whole that I've had? And then obviously highlight those things that seem to be predominant. Highlight those things that seem to be the most significant for you. Remember, this is about your experience with the work. And while we're trying to arrive at what the artist is trying to evoke within us or what the artist's intent was, your experience is still valid, and ultimately the hope is that what you experience is in fact what the artist was trying to intend all along. For the last section here on the notes to take, we're going to look at the conceptual things, the ideas that come to mind. So the first things that I want you to do is notate the concepts that you begin to ponder when you view the artwork. You know, what are the ideas that are coming to mind, the thoughts you're having immediately? Again, think tangible, different from the emotions. Think now the tangible, actual things you can notate with words that you're actually starting to think about, or ideas that jump into your head. I then want you, for a separate section, to specifically outline those that are political, societal, economic, religious, etc. So now I want you to look at broader strokes. I want you to look at more wider ideas, wider philosophies, things that aren't just coming to your mind, right? But things that are maybe on a broader topic. For example, let's say you're viewing an artwork that has a scene depicting a kitchen. Maybe your immediate thought is your own kitchen, right? Maybe your own thought is that casserole you had in the oven yesterday, right? Or like how dinner turned out or what you're gonna have for dinner. But then maybe on like the broader level, when you start thinking about it, when you see a kitchen, maybe there are those just societal ideas of motherhood that come to mind, or misogyny that come to mind because of the associations that people put with women being in a kitchen. Again, these are broader things, these are wider things that aren't necessarily accurate or true, but they're just things that are, you know, possibly coming to mind for you that are broader strokes. For the next notes in this section, I want you to specifically start to put connections to your own life and connections to the lives of others that you know. So these are ideas and things that are relatable. What is it in this visual artwork I'm viewing that is relatable to me, to somebody close to me, to somebody that I loosely know, or just to other people? So it's sort of that interpersonal or personal, more human part of the note-taking experience here. And then for the final little section of notes, I want you to take note of any narratives that you craft or narratives that begin to occur. So you're looking at this, you are projecting yourself onto this image, onto this visual art. So there's stuff that's gonna bounce back to you that has to do with your own experience in life, right? Then, like I said, we're looking at the broader world and what are some ideas that might come to mind about life in general that this artwork is sort of bringing to you in light of you. And again, then we're looking at the connections to other people and our interactions with human beings that this artwork is evoking. And so when all of these things are working together, narratives are going to form. Perhaps a narrative is coming that seems really personal, right? Like something that like, oh, I've lived this, or I've done that before, or this one time I did this, or again, with like that casserole thing, right? Like if you see a scene of a kitchen, perhaps all of a sudden in your mind, you're thinking about either, you know, maybe like next Christmas, right? Like you're thinking of the family being together and like preparing the meal together and what that's going to be like. Write that down. This is the time for that, you know? So write down the narratives that begin to occur for you, or even ones that aren't personal, right? Like if there's a narrative in your head you start to get, then just write that down, even if it has nothing to do with you. You know, even if you're picturing like just another family, like just being together in general, like that is also something I think to take note of. Finally, what I want you to do, as we've done with the other two sections as well, is I want you to highlight the things that have the most prominence. I want you to highlight the things that stand out once you review the notes, and then summarize overall ideas that are coming to mind. So for the final part of this video, I want to discuss the results of this. I want to put the legs on this experiment, so to speak, and start to discuss what is it that we now do with all of this note-taking we just did. What is it that we can sort of glean from this? And the biggest thing is we want to parse the results. As I was mentioning, going through, you want to summarize each of the categories. You want to note things that are significant in each one, and then for this result parsing, what I want you to do is I want you to sort of pinpoint those things that seemed significant and marry across the different aspects. You want to maybe consider things within the visuals that also seem to relate to the ideas that are coming up for you. You want to compare the summaries against one another for each of these sections. And that's again going to help you try to formulate what may correspond across the categories. I did write down here like one example, a very simplified one is, say we have a very gray and black visual identity. So when you were notating the visuals, you're like, color palette, very gray, very black. There's no color. It's all very dark and very gray. Then when you were in the idea section of it, there was like a political idea that seems within this imagery also. And so if you put together black, dark, and then political, you can sort of surmise there that there's an interpretation to be had that war is negative, or there's some kind of negative view of political ideology. Putting these things together and then seeing how they interact, and that's where we begin to arise with interpretations. We begin to have an understanding of this meaning. All the highlighting that I wanted you to do throughout this experiment too is another tool for this sort of cross-examination section. What I want and hope this ultimately does is that it will help you to better understand the artist's intent, which we've spoken about in the past. Ultimately, I believe that the goal for us as artists is for something to arise within you. So when I produce a work of art, I am hoping that there is an emotional, conceptual sort of swirling or a dance that's going to take place within you as the viewer. And that's going to vary from artist to artist, like that's me specifically, but every artist has some sort of intent that they're trying to relay, because art is about communication. What I want in the viewers is what other artists want, but ultimately we're trying to get something communicated to you, and we're trying to evoke something within you as the recipient of the artwork. And so as a result, what I hope this experiment helps you to do in this method is you can find what it is the artist is trying to express. That said, and as I mentioned earlier, your experience as a viewer is valid. So this is all operating in sort of a twofold aspect. On one hand, we're trying to discover the artist's intent through this experience and what the artist is trying to say and communicate in a more indirect way. But at the same time, we're also just trying to explore our own experience, our own feelings with the artwork, so that we can become better viewers and we can then have just a deeper experience and know what it means to really be enriched by something that I am viewing. As I was discussing in the conceptual section of when we're looking at the notes, there is that idea of narrative, right? That we're trying to, what are the narratives coming up for us? And in these results, as we're parsing the results, I really want to acknowledge the possibility that the artist is in dialogue with you. The artist is crafting a narrative as well for you to experience. And so going through that section specifically, I want you to also think about like how this is a bit of a breadcrumb trail, right? We're picking up all of the pieces and we're trying to follow the dots or connect the dots, following that lead in order to approach the artist's intent. That's another part of this as well. And you can take that specifically for that section and look at the narrative that's crafted. You know, is this coming from me? How does this relate to the other things in the work? And then what this might mean for the actual narrative the artist is trying to express. I think I will stop there for now. There is a lot that can be said on this topic. There are a myriad of things as viewers we can take note of when viewing art, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I certainly just hope it's helpful for you. I hope that you find more ideas that come to mind when it comes to an approach, and what are the other things that you might be able to look for and add to each of these three sections that will ultimately help your experience with visual art. And again, if we were to expand this to other media, we would have to really consider a lot of other factors too, because the atmosphere in which you're viewing something is also going to impact it and can be a very direct choice by the maker. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I really do hope it was helpful. Please share it with anybody else who might find it worthwhile, and until the next one, take care everybody.